As I live and breathe the first Sunday morning after here on the Matt Barrie Show on the ESPN College Football YouTube channel. We've talked all offseason about the football. Now, Paul Finebaum, we actually get to talk about the football. Now, big picture, I want to start here. Overall, I don't think the games Saturday were that great. There was a lot of blowouts out there, but still, we had a pretty damn good jumping off point to start the football season.
Yeah, no, Matt, I would say in all the times that we've been doing this, it was the most uninteresting opening weekend, and 80 to 99% of the oxygen was on Deion, which is perfectly all right, because there really was, other than some just stupefying upsets with games that really didn't matter all that much. Everything else went pretty much according to plan.
So let's start there. You're right, because look, doubt Coach Prime at your own peril, because he will get into a post-game press conference and he will remind you of that like he did all day yesterday. I said it on College Football Final. That is peak Deion. He high-stepped throughout his entire career, and he high-stepped his way into that press conference after beating TCU. They were 3-touchdown underdogs, and they did what they had to do. 4 receivers over 100 yards, Shedora school record. But, Paul, here's what I find interesting about how things aligned for Colorado and Prime. They owned a Saturday where there was nothing to own, and they were the early kickoff. So from early kickoff through 3:30 p.m. Eastern through the end of the night, Paul, they were the story, and they're going to continue now to be the story.
They are, and that's been the embodiment of Prime's career. And Matt, I know a lot of people are shocked, and I was too, but I shouldn't have been, because I forgot the most important element. It was Deion Sanders in Colorado wasn't the key to this game. It was just accepting the fact that whenever TCU has the stage to itself, they embarrass themselves.
Yeah, look, I'm not going to sit here and argue with that, because we were watching that, and I get the opportunity now to watch college football for 16 hours on Saturdays with Dan Mullen. And as you know, when you're around a coach watching football, it's completely different than any other experience, because they will see things right away and point to it. And then that makes me see it right away and point to it. And he said early on, he's like, wow, TCU is not the same team defensively. They are lost. They're slow. They've got to figure this thing out. And here's how I want to say this. You can't not give Colorado, Coach Prime, and those players credit. You can't. Their stars were playing in FCS last year, and they dominated in their first FBS game. I don't know that the 17 attached to TCU is appropriate based on what we saw. Not taking anything away from Colorado, but I don't know that TCU is the 17th best team in the country.
And listen, I think we both have equal respect for Sonny Dykes, but the real problem now, Matt, is that in these two major events, the 65 to 7 beatdown that nobody will ever forget, and what we saw, they carry this now around their neck. I mean, that they just can't handle the big stage, even though we know that's not true. They beat Michigan in the semifinal. They did, but they lost the championship game. But it will haunt them. And quite frankly, I don't want to hear about TCU anymore this season.
Yeah, I don't think you will, because they were Prime's first at his new job. I got a buddy of mine, a good buddy of mine, is a TCU alum. I was like, dude, the last thing you wanted to do was be Deion Sanders first, and he did it all to himself and a stage all to himself. And as we move forward, we're doing some research on live television real time last night. So at some point last week, Paul, I don't know the day, forgive me, Nebraska was an 8.5-point favorite against Colorado. By the time I got on TV last night, it had moved to 1.5. If they win, like, the hype was there preseason. Hype is here now. If they get through Nebraska and go 2-0, God save the television networks and cameras for Deion.
And Matt, help me with something, because I watched the end of the game Thursday night, and I thought Colorado. I mean, I'm trying to remember. Yeah, Thursday night when Minnesota was playing Nebraska. I thought Nebraska made a coaching change. Why was Scott Frost coaching at the end of that game? Because it did not look any different than what we saw last year.
It was so heartbreaking to watch, because we know, because we've been in this industry and covered it for such a long time, especially college football, we know the heartache that happens in this sport. I still have scar tissue from the Rose Bowl in 1997 with Arizona State and Ohio State. We know this. But the fact that Nebraska fans had to have a game stripped from them literally in the final couple of minutes to go through that again after going through it during the Scott Frost era, to now have to take it against an old classic rival in Colorado and the spotlight, which, by the way, Paul, guess what? It's the noon Eastern kick next Saturday. This is just fascinating how we collide into this.
Yeah, no, and it's I mean, you just have to give him so much credit, and forget Prime for a second. I mean, his players. I mean, his son, Travis Hunter. I mean, I looked at something today, and Matt, we don't have time to waste to even criticize the idea that there's a Heisman list before Labor Day, but of course, Travis Hunter was at the top of the Heisman list, and Sanders was second. But that's fine. It just shows you what he does and what he means to a program. And you can get all these other guys and you can run your team off, but if you have superstars, and he does, it matters.
Here's another one for you. I'll peel behind the curtain for the viewers here on the ESPN College Football YouTube channel. Then we'll move on. We're sitting there and we're watching the game. We're doing our prep for the show yesterday. And this Dylan Edwards kid just keeps going off, screen pass, 75 yards, run. We all sit there because we know Shador, we know Travis Hunter. Those are the guys. We sit there, we're like, who the hell is this Dylan Edwards kid? Start digging in, doing some research, 4-star freshman. Deion got him recruit. He's from Kansas. Here's the scary part. We know in college football that a coach instilling belief in his team is probably 90% of the battle, right? Mm-hmm. If they start to believe, and there's recruits around the country that would otherwise look at Tuscaloosa, look at LSU, look at Georgia, and he starts getting kids to believe, who knows what could happen.
And I'm trying, I don't have it in front of me, but Travis Etienne tweeted, did you see that, about his brother? His brother plays for
Florida.
Clay Napier at Florida.
Yeah.
He said, hey, bro, maybe you ought to consider Prime. And I mean, that's the kind of thing that can create an epidemic. I mean, I was just literally flying yesterday, and I saw that tweet zip through my eyes, and that's why I couldn't even remember it for a second. But I mean, when you got a big time player like that tweeting his brother as opposed to texting him, I mean that sets off alarm bells. And we can say Florida for some other time, but I just thought that just showed you how these things can happen in real time.
You know, I did want to dive into Florida. Maybe we will at the end of this, but I want to focus more on Saturday because there's a couple of other things I wanted to dive into, and specifically kind of a new beginning. We talked about the new beginning for Colorado, and Deion was great. I want to talk about new beginnings with a couple of quarterbacks at some of the SEC schools. Carson Beck at Georgia, highly touted. I think they kind of sleptwalked their way through their game. They got the win as they should. Brock Bowers is Brock Bowers. So we don't need to dive in on them too much. They did what they had to do. Here's the one that I want to stick with you, because we had talked at length about Nick Saban and what they were going to do with their quarterback situation. Paul, Jalen Milroe showed up yesterday, and I know it was against Middle Tennessee State, but he did some things physically that we haven't seen an Alabama quarterback do ever.
Yeah, and we could have been in deep depression today talking about Alabama, but instead the optimism is literally through the roof after what we saw yesterday by Milroe. And I'm always hesitant to jump too much into it, but it was live competition. It was much easier than the competition that he's been dealing with in scrimmages so far, and you could see it. I mean, he looked like a free man in Paris yesterday. Not everything he did was perfect, but most of what he did was. And he clearly has established himself as the guy. And really, I'm not overly concerned about what's behind him because he gets the start against Texas. And I think those who were predicting, bad tidings for Alabama are now switching, maybe too quickly, but they're switching nevertheless.
Yeah, because you see him, and he had that highlight that we ran, drops the snap, fumbles it a little bit, picks it up. It was Alabama typically they had those guys playing receiver and running back. And then just when you think the kid he's a nice runner, he's an athletic runner, He starts throwing seeds about 40 yards down the field. And the question mark we had was, who's going to be the guy that grabs the reins going into week 2 at Texas? I now think Alabama goes into that game with their chest up and out saying, this is our guy, prove to us otherwise.
And the key that you hear people like Dan Mullen and quarterbacks talk about, somebody needs to be a leader, but you can't be a leader until you do something. He's done it.
Yeah.
And for Buckner and Ty Simpson and all these other, the 4th-string quarterback, which we heard way too much about 3 weeks ago, forget it. I think you're going to see that team rally around him. Is it a false flag? I'll let you know in a week. But it's momentum, and I think Alabama needed it because this has been kind of a but it's been a bit of a rough off season, and now you're going to hear Alabama fans calling that crazy show down south that we love. Paul, and that's why Nick Saban's been smiling all along. He knew it. By the way, he did not know it. I think he hoped, but nobody knew it because I have friends who were at practice all last week and they didn't see it from anyone.
That was going to be my follow-up. And you and I have done this long enough. We're almost in sync brain-wise, which is kind of scary for the rest of the country. But I wondered if Saban was playing possum with this, or yesterday was really the birth of the next Alabama, like, oh, hell, we got to deal with that now.
Well, I think he was hopeful, but I don't think there's any way he could have seen it, Matt, because in scrimmages, the quarterback's off limits, so you really don't know. I mean, you know that he's challenged or had been challenged in the passing game. That's been proven time and time again, and I kept hearing that. And I think there was also a bias against Milroe. It was just, he had a bad game last year against Texas A&M, and it just would not go away. And I think people were eager to see him supplanted, and now not happening.
Segue, because you mentioned this game against Texas A&M. Texas A&M got their start yesterday. Jimbo Fisher, year 6. Bobby Petrino, offensive coordinator, 52-10, the win there. Connor Wegman, 5 touchdown passes, at least for a night. Everything was smiles. Everything was cakes and pies. Wegman looked the part, command of the offense. I even thought Max Johnson at his limited time in there looked pretty good. And I say this because last year we all are aware of what happened against Appalachian State. They couldn't get them out of the way. They couldn't even beat them. But Texas A&M did what they had to do in a season opener, Paul, which is take an inferior opponent, grab them by the horse collar, get them out of their stadium with a big win.
And you're already hearing fans say, I saw the difference between Jimbo Fisher plays and Bobby Petrino plays. Listen, I mean, maybe Dan sitting there watching last night can tell I'm not sophisticated enough, but it did look a lot better. And I think another program needed confidence because, I mean, they have a game this week that most are going to predict them to win.
Yeah.
But the other side is starving too. So you do need a little confidence. But Matt, I warn everyone, don't ever read too much into that first game.
Yeah, and I don't know. Look, Miami won impressively. They beat an inferior opponent as well, which, by the way, talking to Mario Cristobal, he'll tell you the biggest problem year 1 is that we would take these teams and mess around with them that didn't belong in our field, and sometimes they would beat us, and sometimes they would hang around too long. So they did what they had to do in their game. But I agree. I think week 2 with these two teams meeting up, that you hit it on it perfectly. They are starving for a breakthrough. I find week 2 to be fascinating. We'll get to it next week, but you're right. Week 1, Miami took care of business. Texas A&M took care of business. Put them together on the field and see what everybody's got. Now, I want to move over to the Big Ten because there's a couple of things I want to get to. Let's start with the absolute embarrassment that's Michigan acting like Jim Harbaugh died. Can we stop with the moment of the I formations, the 4s up in the air? Look, 3-game suspension for allegedly fibbing to the NCAA. Let's quit acting like the guy's in a hospital waiting to break out and coach.
Yeah, and this isn't a case where the NCAA forbid a star for North Carolina or LSU from playing in a game. This was agreed upon. This was self-imposed. So I mean, Michigan fans, I realize you live in a different world up there in southern Canada. But the point being, talk to your athletic director, talk to your president. Those are the cats that came up with that idea.
The free Jim Harbaugh shirt that McCarthy was wearing, like they had fun with it, he and Blake Corum in the postgame press conference, but it was almost getting funny. It was like we were doing a fundraiser for Harbaugh that you just didn't know that he was okay. It's like, man, the guy's sitting at home watching the game. We're good. Now, Michigan was also.
I think that's not a bad. It may not be a bad idea in the future just to leave Jim Harbaugh home on Saturday.
Just let him text message his coaching tidbits from the sidelines. But they got the win yesterday. We're not surprised by that. JJ McCarthy looked good. Blake Corum looked good. Roman Wilson looked good. We've said it at length here on this show. Michigan coming into the season, not too many question marks, which is why they're one of the teams we're looking at as a college football playoff contender out of the Big Ten. But we thought that too about Ohio State. And that was a team on Saturday. They elected to start Kyle McCord. And I sit there with Galloway. I have so for 5-6 years. You want to talk about a team that's loaded with 5-star talent, NFL talent. They just couldn't get it going against Indiana.
No, that reminded me of some of their games last year. I think it was the Northwestern game, another game. They just literally are zoned out, and I can't explain it. That should have been a game that you pretty fired up to play, a road game to a Big Ten, a semi-Big Ten opponent on the first Saturday of the year, but they didn't. They were a no-show, even though they got a win.
Yeah, Kyle, we'll see what he does there. Devin Brown, Kyle McCord, the quarterbacks that are vying for that job, and in the stats, I think the 2 stars. I want to say Marvin Harrison Jr. only had 2 catches for less than 20 yards. Emeka Egbuka had 3 catches for 20-something yards. Paul, you and I both know, having not played college football, but we can tell you have star receivers that aren't getting the ball. Star receivers aren't one to just kind of sit down and let that happen.
Especially future number 1 draft choices.
Yeah. So keep an eye on the Ohio State situation. Every coach tell you a win is a win is a win. We get that. But when you've got a team that's got NFL talent and playoff aspirations, they're going to need to get that thing going a little bit. All right, Paul, we'll get you out of here on a couple of these. First one, put you on the spot. Who is the most disappointing from Thursday night start through the end of the first Saturday in college football? Who to you was the most disappointing and why?
I'm going to get to South Carolina in a minute, but to me, and I'm not including Baylor and games like Texas Tech, those crazy upsets, but I came away from Florida just baffled. I've been told in the offseason, I wasn't expecting them to be a great team, but I just expected them to look well coached, organized, and everything they did was to hand Utah a game. And Utah, Matt, was about as shorthanded as they could be, right? Without a star quarterback, a star tight end, defensive players. I realized they were playing at home, and 2 weeks from now, we'll be talking about Tennessee, Florida, and that will clear up everything that I'm about to say. But Billy Napier continues to underwhelm as a head coach at Florida. That is now 14 games into his tenure. It looked like his first game. He looked clueless at times. But Tim Tebow did tell me Friday afternoon that he was encouraged that the Gators did not quit.
Oh, that is good. I mean, that's something you want to see. Their new number 15 at quarterback, Graham Mertz, as long as the old 15 says they didn't quit. But there were some puzzling things, Paul. On special teams, and Mullen was steadfast on this. And so was Acho, who I was with on Thursday night. They said that they had 2 number 3s out there, which gave Utah first down, which started the momentum. I was like, man, that special teams coach is in trouble. Both of them said, hell with that. That's on the head coach to know the numbers on special teams. That's you walk through that every single week. It was little things like that made no sense.
Yeah, no, and that will haunt because they were not out of that game when that happened, and that completely blew the game open. And there's just nothing he says that really is compelling. And he said, yeah, I saw a lot of good things. No. He didn't see a lot of good things. I mean, just go out there. I don't mind a coach who goes up there and just takes responsibility, that says, I blew it. It won't happen again. I mean, give the Tim Tebow promise speech. Just don't go in there and sound like a high school gym teacher.
Yeah, and they couldn't run the ball. I mean,
Oh man, I mean they couldn't do anything, and we
were,
heard a lot about their running attack.
yeah, and they could. ETN back. We'll call that back. ETN was one of the guys that they thought maybe would get off this year, and I don't want to pick on the player, but Graham Mertz was a guy that came out of high school highly touted, but I just didn't think from the jump with that decision to go to Florida. Paul, I never thought that fit when I saw it. I'm like, I kind of know what Billy wants to do on offense, and I just don't know that Graham fits what he's trying to do. There's just something with the fit there that doesn't sync up.
Things are in trouble when I heard from fans Friday, but hey, you don't realize how well we're recruiting. Well, good luck. We have not seen anybody sign a letter of intent yet. So I mean that was Florida. The other one, Matt, was Saturday night in Charlotte. Yeah. All season long, I've been hearing about how this momentum from beating Tennessee and beating Clemson, and the Gamecocks just laid an egg. I mean, they were manhandled. And give Gene Chizik credit.
My gosh,
his defense has been out to lunch for a year or two, but I mean, he brought it, and that looked like the Gene Chizik that was part of Mac Brown's national championship team many years ago. It was brilliant to watch. What was so fascinating about that game was how I mean, North Carolina, the standard bearer of the ACC, and there were somebody sent me a audio this morning of Carolina fans chanting SEC, because there was a screenshot of Bubba Cunningham talking to Jim Phillips, the ACC commissioner. Bubba's the athletic director. Yeah. I mean, there is such a fissure right now in the ACC. And Matt, I know we're reacting to games, but I just want to congratulate the ACC for essentially voting out Clemson, North Carolina, and Florida State, because after what happened Friday with the admission of SMU, Cal, and Stanford, they have essentially given those three a ticket out. That league, which was already teetering toward irrelevancy, has just taken on three schools that devalue an already discounted product even more, and that league is just heading toward the iceberg.
Which is sad, because we saw the Pac-12, who I believe top to bottom could be the most entertaining conference in college football this side of the SEC. They're doing the same thing. They've got all the star power out there, Caleb Williams, Michael Penix Jr. It's a really good league. Colorado now with Deion, and you're right. I mean, this thing isn't over. This realignment, as you put it, Titanic, is not over. And with regards to the game and Gene Chizik, I'm with you, because I think they had 8 or 9 sacks. South Carolina's offensive line could not hold them. If North Carolina has a defense, look out. Rest of the ACC. Spencer Rattler was good statistically, but couldn't get anything going. People didn't consider the stuff that South Carolina lost in the transfer portal. Star running back to USC out left, star player, pocket knife guy that we'll see tonight, Sunday night, for Florida State. And Paul, it didn't look as if South Carolina had the guys, the dudes, to hang out with North Carolina. And that is a problem with what's coming on the Gamecock schedule.
Yeah, not to ruin the Bloody Mary morning for Gamecock Nation even more. I mean, you do have Darius Rucker. He won the musical part of the day, but 2 weeks from yesterday, they go to Athens. And I good luck to people trying to build that up. Oh, these two teams, when they meet, no. South Carolina, just go in there and hope that Kirby Smart's in a good mood, not a bad mood.
Yeah. Brock Bowers, he's probably going to want to get us some stats up that game. Typically that game, you're right. People, when I was in Columbia, I mean, give Steve Spurrier credit, because he had an inferior team and he would hang with them between the hedges and had to find a way to do that all the time. DJ Shockley was at quarterback, Blake Mitchell, and you're thinking, wait a second, this is going to be a game. And it was, but that look, end of the day, what we saw to South Carolina, they've got a lot of work to do before they get to Georgia, who got their win yesterday. So that's the biggest disappointment week one. Who impressed you most? Biggest surprise, kind of your big picture. Hey, this was fun to watch. They looked really good.
Well, Alabama. I mean,
Yeah.
I think they were the team that looked like some of the fans were predicting, but I just did not expect to see them as crisp. And while I'm praising them, I don't want to go too far. I mean, and obviously we already talked about Colorado, but that's an obvious. But to me, I just felt better about the Crimson Tide. A lot of people have put them in the playoffs, and what they showed yesterday, they could have dogged it easily.
Yeah.
They could say, hey, we don't need to do anything. But in fact, I think Nick Saban felt like they did need to do something, and that's exactly what they did. And if we're sitting here a week from today talking about Alabama beating Texas, I think you can point back to a mop-up game, a cupcake game that actually helped them a lot.
I think you find out more about teams and who they are as a locker room and who they are as a unit when they play teams that they should beat the hell out of, and they beat the hell out of them. You don't want a team that lets an inferior opponent hang around, because that shows a crack here and there in the team's attention to get out there and beat a team that they should. And I think a lot of the Powers did that yesterday. I think for me, the biggest disappointment, I'm with you. I was shocked at Florida. I thought they would come out in year two and maybe have that big punch. They just looked listless towards the end. And for me, the biggest, not surprise or pleasure to watch, because you're right, we talked about Colorado, but I'm here to tell you, I said this in the preseason, I'm going to consistently stay with it now. If Joe Milton channels all of that athleticism, we saw them do it yesterday. Virginia's going through some stuff. Heupel, if he keeps recruiting and if Milton stays anywhere near what he's capable of, you have got to take Tennessee seriously, because that kid is athletic as a player and a quarterback that we have in the game.
Yeah, Heupel, because I was in Nashville, Heupel was at a high school game Friday night looking at the top prospect in the state. And I mean, he's got it going. And Matt, it's a cliche. Oh, he's a player's coach. But I don't know if I've ever seen more of a player's coach than Josh Heupel. I mean, he just relates to those guys. He's so unconventional. And, I think it really, everybody's a lot of young coaches are still connected to their past, but he represents, it's been 20 years, a little more than 20 years, but he could be like, the kind of the guy that showed up for college at 40. I mean, he could fit in that locker room as a player as well as a head coach.
Josh Heupel, this decade's Van Wilder. Yeah. And here's the other thing. We'll leave it with this. Now that all of the Jeremy Pruitt past has been sanctioned down and Tennessee now has that in front of them, now that you can move on from that, Tennessee being back, if they are in fact back, is good for the sport, because they're one of those food group brands. That's why I'm excited about Florida State. That's why I'm hoping Miami gets to that point. Lincoln Riley resuscitating USC. We think Matt Rule will get it there with Nebraska. But all in all, on a blowout Saturday, some storylines you can pick and prod heading into week 2. This was fun. Our first recap, Paul. Looking forward to doing it again next week.
Thank you, Matt. And next week, we'll have some meaty games to discuss.
Who doesn't love meat and some protein on a Sunday morning? This has been the Matt Barrie YouTube Show on the College Football YouTube channel.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.